P1. She barely finished the final note before her body gave out. There was no scream, no drama, just the dull thud of the microphone hitting the stage and the world's brightest star collapsing beneath the spotlight. In the crowd, tens of thousands screamed. Some thought it was part of the show, but there, sprawled out in silence, Lady Gaga's eyes didn't blink, and the dead silence in her earpiece was more terrifying than any noise. The Paris concert had been the biggest of her tour so far, a roaring sea of feathers, glitter, and adoration. Gaga had been pushing through night after night, fueled by ambition, adrenaline, and something darker, something unspoken. No one expected this. Backstage was instant chaos. Her security team rushed to block the view, roadies cleared the wings, and within minutes she was in an ambulance, headed to St. Louis Hospital. 7 minutes of unconsciousness, long enough for the world to begin whispering. Overdose? Breakdown? A final performance gone too far? But the doctors knew better, and soon, so would she. 2 days later, in a cold, dim room scented with antiseptic and panic, Gaga opened her eyes. She saw them immediately, 3 doctors and 1 nurse, all too composed. The kind of calm that only exists when someone is about to deliver news they hope they'll never have to give. "Miss Germanata," the older doctor began, "we found something in your blood work." She sat up slowly, dizzy, foggy, but alert enough to hear the weight in his voice. "What is it?" A long pause. "You have a rare genetic condition, a type of marrow dysplasia, progressive, degenerative, and incurable." She didn't scream, didn't ask questions, just stared straight ahead at the white wall, as if expecting someone to yell, "Cut!" and reveal it was all a scene in a surreal art film. But no one yelled, and nothing cut. For the next few weeks, the diagnosis remained a secret. No cryptic Instagram posts, no press releases, only her and the truth. And the truth was this. The only hope of survival, however, faint, was a transplant. But not just any donor. She needed a perfect match, a near-identical DNA structure, something that only came from a close blood relative. She called her parents, her sister, her cousins. Everyone got tested. And everyone came back incompatible. She was running out of options and time. That's when one of the doctors suggested something experimental. "There's an international genetic matching program," he explained. "It cross-references anonymous DNA databases worldwide. If there's a match out there, even one you've never met, we might find it." She hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." 1 week later, under a gray Manhattan sky, the call came. "Miss Germanata," the voice said, hushed and clinical. "This is the European Genetic Institute. We found a result that requires in-person confirmation. It's highly sensitive." 3 days later, she flew to Rome in secret. No entourage, no makeup, just sunglasses and silence. In a discreet underground lab near the Tiber River, 2 scientists and a legal advisor met her with solemn faces. A sealed envelope lay on the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The older scientist cleared his throat. "We found a match with 99.97% compatibility. Immediate family, a parent or sibling." She stared at him, her heart thudding like a drum in a canyon. "Who is it?" He slid a second document forward. "Name Robert Lionel, born 1975. American nationality. Current name, Pope Leo XIV. The room fell into stillness. She blinked. Once. Twice. Laughed. "Is this a joke?" "It's not." No, you don't understand. That's the Pope." "Yes. And genetically, he is your half-brother." She felt the floor tilt beneath her. Memories flashed her mother's summer in New York in the early 80s. The nameless seminarian she never spoke about. The time Gaga asked who her real father was, and her mother just cried. It all snapped together. She wasn't just a performer, an icon, a symbol. She was his sister. And he, the Pope, was her only chance to live. She alone. He took the envelope, felt its weight. It was heavier than it should have been, as if it carried more than words. He opened it carefully. No preamble. Just a handwritten letter in strong, deliberate cursive. "Dear Robert, You don't know me. At least, not yet. But I know who you are. Not just the Pope. Not just the man in white. I know you as something else. Something no one else is allowed to say aloud. I know you as my brother. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a mistake. Some cosmic glitch in a DNA database. But science is cold, clean, clear, and it told me what the world never did. That we share blood. That we come from the same man. I don't care how. I don't even care why. But I need you to know this. I'm dying. There is no cure. Only hope. And that hope has your name written on it. You don't owe me anything, we've never met, but I'm reaching out because I have no one else left. If what I've learned is true, if your heart is even half of what the world believes it is, then please, Robert, before I leave this world, let me meet my brother. I don't want to steal your peace. I don't want headlines or press. Just you. Just truth. I'll wait. But not for long. Stefani. Robert sat in stunned silence. His hands trembled, and the edges of the letter curled slightly from the heat of his grip. For nearly a minute, the only sound was the ticking of a small clock beside him. Then he whispered aloud, though no one was listening. Stefani. He recognized the name immediately. The world did. The singer, the icon, the activist. But in this letter, there was no makeup, no theater, no fame, only desperation. And something even deeper. Family. His mind flooded with questions he couldn't answer. Could it be true? His father? He stood slowly, walking to the window overlooking St. Peter's Square. He had stood there 1,000 times before. But now, the view looked different. Smaller, more fragile. The church had survived scandals, wars, assassinations. But this wasn't about the church. This was about him. The man beneath the robes. The son of a man with secrets. That night, Robert did not sleep. He called no one. Not even Cardinal Visconti, his oldest advisor. He did not seek counsel, nor prayer. What he felt was beyond doctrine. Instead, he went to the Vatican Archivessalone. The guards didn't ask questions. They had learned long ago that when the Pope walked at midnight, it was best not to follow. He moved like a man possessed, a lantern in one hand, his heart in the other. He pulled files on his father, birth records, old seminary logs, letters, notes, journals. And there, buried under decades of dust and Latin inscriptions, he found it. A single line in an old seminary registry from 1984. Father Lionel Robert, temporary mission to New York, summer exchange. His father had never spoken of it, not once, not even on his deathbed. Robert's breath caught. He sat down on the cold stone bench, head in his hands, overwhelmed by the implications. The whispers in his mind grew louder. If it's true, she is my blood, my sister, and she's dying. The next morning, as Rome stretched into golden light, Robert took a blank sheet of Vatican stationery and began to write. His pen hesitated only once when addressing her name. Stefani, if you are reading this, then you already know the silence that surrounds the life I now live. But today, that silence breaks. Your letter reached me, and if what you say is true, then I have a duty beyond the cassock, a duty not to the church, but to the soul, yours and mine. Meet me, in person, no press, no cameras, just us. There is a small chapel beneath the Apostolic Palace. Few know it exists. It has no name, no altar, only a single candle. Come tonight, midnight. Ask no one, tell no one. You'll know me not by the robes, but by the eyes. Robert. He sealed the letter himself and handed it directly to a trusted nun from the Secretariat. I need this delivered immediately, he said. Where, Holiness? To a woman in Rome. Her name is Stefani Germanata. The nun's face twitched, but she did not speak. She bowed and disappeared into the stone corridors like a ghost carrying truth. That evening, while the city glowed with the hush of anticipation, Gaga stood on the balcony of her hotel room, staring out at the rooftops. Her fingers clutched the reply from Robert. Tears lined her eyes but didn't fall. She had worn 1,000 costumes in her life, played 100 personas. But now, she was stripped bare. Just a woman. Just a sister. Midnight approached. And beneath the marble weight of the Vatican, in a chapel no one spoke of, a single candle flickered. At exactly 12 o'clock, the door creaked open. Footsteps echoed on ancient stone. 2 souls entered from opposite ends. And when their eyes met in the silence, no words were needed. They already knew. It was the first time in decades that someone looked at him and didn't see the Pope. Not a saint, not a symbol, not a savior. Just a man. A man with tired eyes, worn hands, and a heart that had carried the weight of billions yet now trembled under the gaze of one woman. Stefani stood just inside the chapel door, still cloaked in a long coat, her platinum hair pulled into a loose bun beneath a black scarf. The silence between them pulsed. Neither moved, neither spoke. The candle flickered in the center of the chapel, its small flame casting long shadows over the ancient stones. It was the only source of light, yet it illuminated everything they had never said. Robert swallowed. His throat was dry. "You came," he finally said, his voice lower than he expected. "I had to," she answered softly. "You're my brother." He flinched not at her voice, but at that word, brother. He had lived a life in the service of a father, but never once imagined what it would feel like to be called someone's brother. It was both foreign and familiar, like a song he had heard only in dreams. He motioned toward the bench carved into the wall. They sat, slowly, with a sacred distance between them 2 lives, 2 timelines, suddenly colliding at the edge of something neither could name. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Then she turned toward him. "Do you believe me?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands. Those same hands that had blessed thousands, buried hundreds, held the weight of a chalice and the weight of the world. "I didn't want to," he said finally. "But I went to the archives. I found the record. My father, he was in New York the year you were born." She nodded. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but none fell. "Not yet." "He never told you?" "Number." "Not a word. Not even when he was dying. He took it with him." She looked down at her hands. Fingertips gently rubbed her knuckles as if trying to awaken an old memory. "You look like him," she whispered. "So do you." They smiled, just for a moment. A fragile, flickering smile. An echo of something normal, something human. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "Not money, not recognition, not some tabloid headline." "I know," he replied. "You didn't come for scandal. You came for the truth. And a chance to live," she added. He looked at her, then truly looked. And for the first time, he didn't see Lady Gaga. He didn't see the performer, the activist, the myth. He saw her. Just her. A woman unraveling at the edges. A sister whose body was betraying her. "How bad is it?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "Terminal. Unless—" He finished the sentence for her. "Unless I'm a match." She nodded slowly. Like every movement cost energy she no longer had. "I didn't come to force you," she said. "I came because you were the only one left, and because some part of me thought maybe you'd want to know me, even if I die." He felt the floor shift beneath him. The truth was, part of him did want that. More than he expected. He had never had siblings, never imagined them. But now, in this impossible twist of fate, he wasn't alone. She was a piece of him, a missing piece he didn't know he was missing. He stood, walked to the candle. He stared into the flame, searching it like an oracle. "You know what they'll say if this gets out." "Yes," she replied, "that your father sinned, that I'm the product of scandal, that you were part of a lie." He turned to her. "But I don't feel shame. I feel found." She exhaled, a long breath that carried decades of uncertainty, loneliness, and longing. "I feel the same." He walked back to her. This time, when he sat down, he closed the distance between them. "I'll take the test," he said. "Tomorrow." She didn't respond at first. Her eyes welled up again. This time, with more than fear, there was relief in them. A silent flood of hope. "And if I'm a match," he continued, "I'll do it. Whatever it takes." Her lips trembled. "You would risk your health?" "Yes." "And your position?" He looked down, then up again. "My position never mattered as much as people think. But this," he placed a hand over his heart, "this matters." She placed her hand over his, and for the first time, they felt the blood between them. Not just cells, not just shared DNA, but something deeper. A current that had crossed oceans of silence and years of separation to bring them to this moment. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's tolled once, a soft, distant chime that seemed to acknowledge the weight of what had just been said. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You should go, before anyone notices." She nodded, wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. He stood and walked to a small wooden box near the wall. From inside, he retrieved something old and delicate, a rosary. Its beads were smooth with age. The crucifix faded by time. He held it out. "It was our father's," he said. She took it gently, holding it to her heart. "Will you be okay?" she asked. "I will," he said, "now that I know I have a sister." She smiled, small, sad but real. "I'll wait for your call. You won't have to wait long." She reached the door, then paused, turned once more. "You know," she said, "I used to dream I had a brother. I thought it was just fantasy, childhood nonsense. But maybe it was something more." He smiled faintly. "Maybe God speaks in dreams." And then she was gone. The door closed gently behind her. Robert stood alone again. But for the first time in his life, he no longer felt lonely. The Vatican medical wing had never known a secret like this. No plague, no Pope's illness, no clandestine exorcism. Nothing compared to what was happening behind those marble walls. Because this wasn't about the church. This was about blood. At dawn, while Rome still slumbered beneath a veil of gold and fog, a convoy of unmarked black vehicles entered through the eastern gate of the apostolic compound. No guards in traditional regalia. No waving flags. Only silence, tinted glass, and tension. Inside the center vehicle sat Pope Leo XIV, no longer adorned in white robes, no ring of office on his finger, no trace of ceremony. Just Robert. The man. The brother. He stared out the window as the city passed by like a ghost, ancient walls, broken fountains, and fading saints carved into stone. But his eyes weren't on the city. They were on her. On Stefani. On what they might lose. Or gain. The vehicle pulled into a private entrance at the medical wing. The director, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, waited alone by the door. No bows, no protocols, just a silent nod, as agreed. "Are we clear?" Robert asked, stepping onto the polished floor. "Yes, Holiness," the doctor replied. "No cameras. Only your private physician and 2 technicians, all sworn to secrecy." They moved swiftly. The corridor was quiet, lined with low lights and scents of lavender oil and antiseptic. In the distance, a candle flickered inside a small chapelette, flames steady but faint. Robert didn't speak. He knew what had to be done. He entered the exam room. It smelled sterile, cold. A stainless steel tray glistened under soft light. A blood collection kit already waited. The technician, young and nervous, avoided his gaze. "Proceed," Robert said. The needle entered his arm with a whisper. A single drop of blood blossomed in the tube like a rose in water dark, alive, sacred. 1 vial. Then 2. Sealed. Labeled. Whispered over in Latin. Then vanished into the hands of the lab assistant. Robert closed his eyes. A silent prayer crossed his lips, though no one heard the words. Not even him. The wait began. Across the city, in a discreet hotel overlooking the Tiber River, Stefani sat barefoot on a velvet chair, watching the water slip beneath the ancient bridges. Rome had never felt so old, or so alive. She wore a wool sweater far too big for her frame and held a steaming cup of ginger tea. The symptoms had worsened in the last few days: fatigue, tremors, pain she didn't talk about. Her team had begged her to rest. But rest meant stillness, and stillness meant thinking. She didn't want to think. She wanted answers. A knock on the door startled her. Just room service tea and fruit she wouldn't eat. She nodded, smiled politely, and closed the door again. The silence returned. She turned her phone face down, but every 5 seconds, she flipped it over again. Waiting. She had lived in the center of attention her whole life. She had sung in front of millions, danced in glass cages, bled on stage for applause. But now all she wanted was a text message. She whispered softly, "Please, let him be a match." And somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed noon. The results came late that evening. Robert was alone in his private study, reading a passage from the book of Psalms when the doctor knocked. He stood silently in the doorway, holding an envelope. Robert saw his face first blank, unreadable, but his fingers trembled slightly. "Come in." The envelope was thick, paper of the highest grade, sealed with the Vatican crest. Robert opened it slowly. Inside, a single page. Compatibility. 99.9%. A perfect match. He stared at the page, at the numbers, at the truth. The doctor cleared his throat. "Holiness, this level of compatibility is extraordinary. Statistically nearly impossible." Robert looked up. His voice was calm. "She is my sister." "Yes, and I am her donor." The doctor hesitated. "There are risks. The procedure will require you to undergo anesthesia. A portion of marrow must be extracted. You'll need recovery time." "I understand. You'll be vulnerable. There may be questions, speculation." "I've faced worse." The doctor nodded. "Shall I begin arrangements?" "Yes. Prepare the operating room. Notify her. I want it done by morning." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the night. Below, St. Peter's Square glowed softly in the dark. Pilgrims wandered without knowing that history had just shifted again silently, like breath in a cathedral. He placed a hand on the glass. "She's waited long enough." At that exact moment, Stefani sat on her bed, with her knees pulled to her chest, listening to a recording of her father's old jazz collection. The room was dark, except for the dim blue light of her phone screen. It vibrated once. The message was short. "We are a match. Tomorrow. R." She didn't scream, didn't speak. She simply pressed the phone to her chest and wept. Silent tears, soft sobs, relief that didn't ask for permission. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. The Vatican had never been so silent. Not during conclaves, not during wars, not even during death. Because this wasn't silence born from ritual. It was the silence of fear, of love, of blood preparing to be shared. In the early morning haze, the private wing of the Apostolic Medical Center was sealed. No cardinals, no aides, no guards. Just 3 doctors, a sterile room, and 2 souls connected by DNA, destiny, and a secret that could still shatter the world. Robert sat on the edge of the surgical table in a linen tunic. His cross had been removed, his papal ring left behind, his heart, though his heart was louder than ever. His breathing was slow, deliberate, but every heartbeat echoed like a drum in his chest. He had made peace with death many times, but never like this. Never for someone who had just entered his life and already meant everything. The walls around him were white and cold, but he wasn't afraid. The sterile scent of the room reminded him of the hospitals he visited so often as Pope. But now, he wasn't there to bless anyone. He was the patient, the offering. Dr. Marchesi, the lead surgeon, entered with quiet reverence. "Are you certain you want to see her before the procedure, Holiness?" "I asked too," Robert said. "It's not protocol, it's family." The doors opened, and the air shifted. Stefani entered slowly, wheeled in by a nurse. She looked fragile, but her gaze held fire. Beneath the hospital gown, beneath the exhaustion, she was still her fierce, vulnerable, impossibly brave. Their eyes met, and in that silence, everything was said. "You made it," she whispered. "I always was going to." She smiled, a weak but genuine curve of her lips. "I've done a lot of strange things in my life," she said, "but this tops the list." Robert laughed softly. Joining the Pope for a bone marrow transplant wasn't on your tour schedule? Not quite. The nurse gently gestured toward the prepped IV lines. Time to begin, she said softly. Stefani reached for Robert's hand. Before we go under, I want to say something. Please. I used to wonder if I came from anything good, if I was a mistake, or just some accident of fate. But now, knowing you exist, knowing who you are, it changes everything. I don't feel lost anymore. Robert held her hand tighter. You were never lost. You just hadn't been found. She blinked tears away. Thank you for this, for showing up. I'll always show up. That's what family does. They stared at each other for a long time, drinking in the moment like it might be their last. Then, her fingers trembled as the sedative entered her bloodstream. Her grip softened. I love you, she whispered, and then her eyes closed. Robert leaned down and kissed the back of her hand. I love you too. He lay back, letting the nurses adjust the machines. He looked at the ceiling at the crucifix above the surgical lamp and whispered, Take me, use me, let this work. And the world faded. The procedure took over 3 hours. The marrow was extracted with absolute precision. Robotic arms moved under human supervision. The surgeons barely spoke, their eyes focused, their hands steady. Gregorian chants played softly from a speaker in the chapel above, filtering into the operating room like a prayer woven into the light. A nurse read silent scripture with her lips. Stefani's body accepted the transplant with grace. No allergic reaction. No immediate complications. Her breathing remained stable. Her temperature consistent. Her blood received as cells like it had been waiting all her life. In the next room, Robert rested under sedation. Monitors blinked steadily. His blood pressure was low, but expected. His strength was intact. A doctor turned to the nurse and whispered, This is going to save her. By late afternoon, the city of Rome had returned to its usual chaos. Bells rang. Tourists gathered. Pilgrims circled the square. But inside the Vatican walls, time had stopped. Robert was wheeled into a private recovery suite. The windows had been covered. The curtains drawn. One candle burned beside his bed. He woke with a start, heart pounding, throat dry. For a second, he didn't know where he was. And then he remembered. The nurse handed him a glass of water. She's stable, she said gently. You both made it. He nodded, unable to speak. Emotion knotted his chest. He reached for a pen and paper, and with a shaky hand wrote one line. You're stronger than you think. We'll finish this song together. Or. Across the hall, in another room softened by candlelight, Stefani stirred. Her body ached. But her heart felt calm. She opened her eyes slowly, blinked at the blurred ceiling, and whispered, Am I alive? The nurse nodded. You're here. She turned her head and saw the note. She didn't read it right away. She just held it, pressed it to her chest, and cried. The sun had risen twice since the operation, but for the Vatican, time had stood still. 2 days of silence. 2 days of waiting. Rome held its breath. Cameras pointed to closed windows. Journalists speculated. Cardinals avoided questions. And the faithful prayed. Inside those ancient walls, behind the bronze gates and marble statues, life had been reduced to a single word. Recovery. Robert sat by the window now, wrapped in a woolen robe, sipping lukewarm tea. His body was sore, his spirit still catching up with the whirlwind of truth. But his eyes, they were different, lighter, younger. By late afternoon, the city of Rome had returned to its usual chaos. Bells rang. Tourists gathered. Pilgrims circled the square. But inside the Vatican walls, time had stopped. Robert was wheeled into a private recovery suite. The windows had been covered, the curtains drawn. One candle burned beside his bed. He woke with a start, heart pounding, throat dry. For a second, he didn't know where he was. And then he remembered. The nurse handed him a glass of water. She's stable, she said gently. You both made it. He nodded, unable to speak. Emotion knotted his chest. He reached for a pen and paper, and with a shaky hand wrote one line. You're stronger than you think. We'll finish this song together. R. Across the hall, in another room softened by candlelight, Stefani stirred. Her body ached, but her heart felt calm. She opened her eyes slowly, blinked at the blurred ceiling, and whispered, "Am I alive?" The nurse nodded. "You're here." She turned her head and saw the note. She didn't read it right away. She just held it, pressed it to her chest, and cried. The sun had risen twice since the operation, but for the Vatican, time had stood still. 2 days of silence, 2 days of waiting. Rome held its breath. Cameras pointed to closed windows. Journalists speculated. Cardinals avoided questions, and the faithful prayed. Inside those ancient walls, behind the bronze gates and marble statues, life had been reduced to a single word: recovery. Robert sat by the window now, wrapped in a woolen robe, sipping lukewarm tea. His body was sore, his spirit still catching up with the whirlwind of truth. But his eyes, they were different, lighter, younger. Across the hall, Stefani had begun to walk again. Each step was slow, measured, but firm. The transplant had taken hold, her color had returned, and with it, a strength neither she nor the world expected. Their reunion that morning was quiet. No fanfare, no photographs. He opened the door, and she stood there. Their eyes met, and they laughed because neither could explain the emotion flooding them. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper, something like rebirth. "I brought something," she said. She held a pair of earbuds in her hand. "I want you to hear a song I wrote when I thought I was dying." He gestured toward the couch. "I'd be honored." They sat side by side, the sun casting soft lines across the floor. She placed one earbud in his ear, the other in hers, and pressed play. The melody was haunting. Sparse piano chords, layered with the raw echo of her voice. It wasn't polished. It wasn't pop. It was pure soul. The lyrics were confessional, about loneliness, about searching for a place to belong, about forgiveness for things that weren't her fault. And in the second verse, she sang about a man she had never met. A shadow, a hope, a brother, maybe, or an angel. Robert closed his eyes, and when the music ended, he opened them full of tears. "I think," he whispered, "that was your prayer." "It was," she said. "I just didn't know who I was praying to." The Vatican press office had waited long enough. That afternoon, a short statement was released. "The Holy Father has undergone a minor surgical procedure and is recovering well. He extends his gratitude to the medical team and asks for continued prayers." Nothing about her. Nothing about the truth. That wasn't a decision made lightly. "Are you sure you don't want the world to know?" Robert had asked earlier. She nodded. "Not yet. Let them see us first. Let them feel it before we explain it." That night, they dined together in the private papal quarters. A simple meal. No wine, just soup, bread, and quiet laughter. Stefani marveled at the chapel attached to his bedroom. "You live inside a painting," she said. "It's not always this peaceful," he replied. "But tonight, maybe God knew we needed the stillness." She sat on the bench beside the altar and looked up at the gold leaf ceiling. "Do you think he planned all this?" Robert hesitated. "I used to believe everything was part of a divine script. Lately, I think he gives us the stage, but we write the lines." She smiled. "Then I'm glad this scene was written." The next day, they walked together through the Vatican gardens. Guards kept a respectful distance. No photographers, no advisors. Just a man and his sister walking among olive trees and fountains carved centuries ago. "I used to run away from places like this," she said, watching a dove land on a statue. "And I used to run toward them," he answered. "So what now?" He paused. "Now, we walk, side by side." For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like a scandal waiting to break. She felt grounded, belonging, holy even in her own way. They passed a stone bench, and she stopped. "I want to sing here someday," she said. "Not for the cameras, for the garden, for the air, for the truth." "You will," Robert promised. They sat again, and for several minutes, they didn't speak. Because some silences aren't empty, they're full. Full of healing. Full of things no language can hold. A few hours later, a quiet visitor arrived. An elderly nun, blind in one eye, who had served in the archives since the pontificate of John Paul II. She carried a box wrapped in velvet. "For the Holy Father," she said, "and his guest." Robert opened the box slowly. Inside, an old photograph, black and white, slightly torn. A man and a woman, smiling, standing on the Brooklyn Bridge. His father, her mother, together. A note was attached, handwritten. "I saw them once, in 1983. They were in love. I never told anyone, but I kept the picture. I thought one day someone would need to know." Stefani traced her fingers over the paper. "That's her," she whispered. Robert nodded, barely breathing. "That's him." And just like that, it was no longer just a theory, no longer DNA, no longer a medical match. It was history. It was real. They were family. Stefani traced her fingers over the photo, eyes fixed on the ghost of a past she never knew existed. The couple on the bridge looked young, free, unaware of the tides their love would one day stir. Her mother, with the same tilt of the head, his father, with the same fierce eyebrows. They belonged to each other, and now she and Robert belonged to them. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I always wondered where I came from," she whispered. "And now I see I came from love." Robert said nothing, his throat too tight to speak. He simply reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers, their fingers intertwined. That night, Robert returned to his private chapel alone. The air was thick with incense, candles burned low, the ancient walls echoed only the sound of his footsteps and breath. He knelt before the crucifix, not as a pope, as a man. "I gave her my blood, Lord," he prayed softly. "But you gave me something greater. You gave me her." He closed his eyes, letting the silence wrap around him like a robe. "I don't know what happens next, but I know I'm not walking alone anymore." A long pause. Then he stood, and as he turned to leave, a single candle flickered twice, then steadied, casting his shadow across the golden walls. Across the hall, Stefani lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The photograph was beside her. So was the note. But more importantly, so was peace. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing, she wasn't running, she wasn't proving anything. She simply existed. Whole. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to rest. Outside the Vatican, the world kept spinning. Rumors began to surface. Whispers of a woman staying in the apostolic palace. Paparazzi spotted her shadow behind a window. Reporters speculated about a secret guest, but no one knew the truth. Not yet. Because some truths need to settle in the soul before being shouted from rooftops. This was one of them. And soon, the world would know. But not tonight. Tonight, a brother and sister lost and found slept under the same roof for the first time. And heaven held its breath. Silence can heal. But outside the Vatican, silence breeds questions. And questions, when left unanswered, grow sharp, like thorns, like swords. 3 days had passed since the operation. Within the apostolic palace, peace had settled like soft dust. Robert and Stefani shared morning walks through hidden courtyards. Laughter returned in fragments. Trust took root in silence. But beyond the marble wall, trouble stirred. Headlines circled the globe. Who is the mysterious woman visiting the Pope? Unconfirmed reports of an American singer in Vatican quarters. Security breach or sacred guest? Photographers camped at every angle of St. Peter's Square. Drones buzzed above the rooftops. Anonymous sources fed tabloids. A single blurry photo of Stefani's silhouette behind a curtain was enough to ignite a firestorm. And the Curia? The Curia was restless. Behind velvet drapes, powerful men gathered in whispers. "This is unacceptable. We cannot allow scandal to stain the papacy." Who is she? What is she doing here? Cardinal Baresi, chief among them, demanded an audience with the Pope. But Robert refused. Not yet. He knew the fire was coming, but he would choose when to walk through it. That afternoon, in the Pope's private study, Stefani stood by a bookshelf lined with centuries of papal wisdom. "You ever read these?" she asked, fingers brushing leather spines. "Some," Robert replied. "Not as many as people think." She smiled. "I like that. Makes you human." He approached, holding a small envelope. "This came for you," he said. "Unmarked. Slipped through the diplomatic pouch." She opened it carefully. Inside, a photo of her on stage taken years ago, and a note typed in block letters. "The world knows who you are. The question is, do they know who he is?" No signature. No return address. Her hand trembled. "Is this a threat?" He took the note gently, scanned it. "Number, it's a warning." She looked at him. "What happens when the truth comes out?" He exhaled slowly. "The church survives many storms, but this one will shake its foundation." That night, Cardinal Baresi was granted his audience. Robert sat in his simple white robe. No crown, no entourage. "I'll be direct," Baresi said. "There are rumors, dangerous ones. The press suspects something. The Curia is losing patience." Robert listened without flinching. "She is my sister," he said plainly. Baresi froze. "Impossible." "I have proof, and I have peace, but the implications, I know them." Baresi leaned forward. "You'll lose control." Robert smiled softly. "I never wanted control, only truth." The cardinal stood, visibly shaken. "The cardinals will meet. They'll demand clarity." "Then let them meet," the Pope replied. "But they won't find fear in me." The next morning, Stefani found Robert alone in the Sistine Chapel. He wasn't praying. He was just looking. Up at the ceiling. At the chaos and beauty. At the finger of God reaching for man. "It's different when it's empty," she said, walking to his side. "It's louder," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you regret telling them?" "No," he said. "The only lie worse than a secret is a secret kept too long." She nodded. "Will they make you step down?" "Maybe," he said. "But they can't take my faith." She smiled. "I've lived my whole life in spotlights, but here I feel invisible." "Not invisible," he said. "Sacred." Her eyes welled up. That afternoon, Robert prepared a statement for the press. His words were handwritten. Simple, direct. But before releasing it, he turned to Stefani. "This will change everything," he said. "I'm ready," she replied. He hesitated. "If you want to leave, I'll understand." She reached out and took his hand. "I didn't come here to hide," she said. "I came here to find the truth, and I found you." Together, they stood at the balcony. Thousands of people filled the square. The sun hung low. A golden hour. He didn't speak. Not yet. But he looked out and saw them. Pilgrims, tourists, believers, skeptics. And he whispered, "When I speak next, it will be the truth." That night, across the globe, headlines exploded. Pop star and Pope. Secret siblings or media hoax? Vatican under fire. Transparency demanded after identity leak. From the stage to the Holy See, who is Stefani Joanne? Talk shows debated the ethics. Bishops released ambiguous statements. Some accused the Vatican of moral collapse. Others called it a divine twist of fate. Social media lit up. Some posted support. Some posted fury. Inside the apostolic palace, none of that noise reached Robert. He sat alone in the candlelit chapel again, the same place where he had prayed before the surgery. But this time, his prayer was different. "Lord," he whispered, "I am not afraid of the world's judgment. Only yours." He paused. She has walked through fire to find herself, and now the world will burn to know her story. He looked up at the crucifix. "Help me speak truth, not to defend myself, but to redeem the silence of those who came before me." The flame beside him flickered violently for a moment. Then it calmed. Meanwhile, Stefani stood at the edge of the balcony, long after he had gone to rest. She looked out over the square dark now. empty except for a few faithful who slept beneath statues. She held something in her hand. A ring. His ring. The papal ring, set aside during surgery. She had asked the guards for it, just for a moment, just to feel its weight. She held it to the sky. Not to wear it. To understand it. It's so heavy, she whispered to herself. And yet he carries it with grace. She didn't put it on. Instead, she kissed it and placed it gently back on the table by his door. Then she wrote a note on the back of a hymn sheet. You carry the crown, but tonight you reminded me that hearts can wear halos too. S. She slid it under his door. At dawn, the bells of St. Peter's rang softly. Not for Mass, for reckoning. Robert rose early, dressed simply, and entered the small room where his handwritten statement awaited final review. He didn't change a word. He simply added a final line at the bottom. And if truth causes scandal, then let it be a holy scandal. He folded the pages and placed them in the hands of his press secretary. Prepare the microphones, he said, and open the balcony. Stefani was already dressed when he entered the hall. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a long black dress and a steady gaze. You don't have to stand with me, he said gently. She stepped forward and fixed his collar. I'm not standing with the Pope today, she said. I'm standing with my brother. As they stepped onto the balcony, the crowd below erupted, not with cheers, but with a kind of stunned reverence. The world had been waiting. Robert took the podium. He looked over the crowd, then, to his right where she stood silently, handed her heart. And for the first time in centuries, the Pope spoke not as a father to his flock, but as a brother to the world. The Vatican had seen centuries of words, but never these. As the Pope stepped up to the microphone, the sun filtered through a soft haze, casting golden lines across the marble balcony. Below, the sea of faces shimmered in silence. No flags, no cheers. Just breathless expectancy. Robert looked over them not as a sovereign, but as a soul. My beloved brothers and sisters, he began, his voice firm, yet tender. Today, I speak to you not with doctrine, but with heart, not as a ruler, but as a man. He paused. The square was silent. For many years I have served this church. I have upheld its rituals, defended its sanctuaries, and preached its truths. But in all that time I carried a silence that did not belong to God. Murmurs rose, then fell. He continued, a few weeks ago, a woman came into my life, not as a stranger, not as a visitor, but as something I never expected my sister. The silence turned to stillness. He let the weight of the words hang in the air. Her name is Stefani Joanne. You may know her as a performer, a public figure, but what you don't know, and what I only recently discovered is that we share the same blood, the same father, the same story, divided by decades of distance and secrecy. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some covered their mouths. Others stared, stunned. She came not to expose me, not to shame this institution. She came looking for truth, and in her search, she saved my life, literally. His hand trembled slightly as he rested it on the podium. A rare disease threatened her life. A transplant was needed. A match was unlikely. But by God's design or destiny, I was that match. He looked to his right. Stefani stood beside him, hands folded, gaze fixed on the crowd. I gave her my blood, but she gave me something far greater clarity, courage, family. He turned back to the people. I was raised in the teachings of service, sacrifice, and silence. But silence is not always holy. Sometimes silence protects shame. Sometimes it preserves power. Today, I break that silence. He raised the paper in his hand. This is the document confirming our shared DNA, signed and sealed by Vatican doctors. But no paper could express what I have come to feel. For in knowing her, I have known myself more deeply. I have remembered the child I once was, the man I tried to become, the brother I never thought I would be. A breeze passed through the square, rustling banners and shawls. Some in the crowd wept openly. Others stood frozen. Still, he spoke. I do not ask for forgiveness. I have not sinned by loving my sister. I do not ask for understanding, for the world has never known how to handle truth dressed in unexpected garments. I ask only that you hear Minot as Popat, as Robert, a man who found his family, and with it, a deeper faith. He stepped back from the microphone, and in the moment that followed, the crowd did not erupt in applause. They stood, in silence, in reverence, in awe. Inside the Curia chamber, the reaction was split like ancient stone. Cardinal Baresi stood pale, lips tight. He's crossed a line, others murmured, but a single cardinal, seated at the far end, spoke above them all. Or perhaps, he said, he's walked where none of us had the courage to go. That evening, back inside the apostolic palace, Robert removed the ring from his finger, not to resign, but to rest. He placed it gently on a silk cloth. Stefani entered, her eyes shining. "You were magnificent," she said. He smiled faintly. "I was terrified." She touched his arm. "That's what made it true." They sat together on the velvet bench beside the fire. "Do you think they'll try to remove you?" she asked. He nodded. "Some will, but I also believe some heard something sacred today." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. And for the first time, he believed her. The walls of the Vatican had weathered centuries of storms, but this one came from within. Cardinals from every corner of the globe had arrived. Their robes swept like red tides through the marble corridors. The air inside the Synod Hall was thick with incense and tension. Robert stood alone at the center. He wore no mitre, no papal cape, only a plain white cassock. Deliberately humble, deliberately human. Behind him, the stained glass glowed with filtered light, casting a kaleidoscope of color across the floor. Before him, rows of seated men, most gray-haired, some stone-faced, a few visibly torn. Cardinal Baresi rose first. "Your Holiness," he said, the title heavy with irony, "we come not with judgment, but concern. Your public declaration has shaken the foundation of this institution." Robert nodded. "Truth often does." Another cardinal stood. "The people are divided. Many see your revelation as heresy disguised as sentiment." Robert's gaze remained steady. "And others have written to me by the thousands, saying it was the first time they felt God breathe through this church." A pause. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "You speak of God," Baresi pressed. "Yet you defy his order. The papacy is not a stage for personal confessions. It is a throne of discipline." Robert stepped forward. "That is where we differ. I never saw this as a throne." Gasps echoed. He continued, voice rising. "I have confessed nothing that offends heaven. I have hidden nothing that dishonors Christ. I told the world about my sister not to boast, not to weep, but to testify, because blood is not shame, and love is not scandal." He pulled a folded paper from his sleeve. "This is a letter from a nun in Mumbai. She writes, 'For the first time, I believe God sees Menno as a servant, but as his child. If this is the fruit of so-called heresy, then let the orchard grow.'" The hall erupted in layered voices. Some shouted, some clapped, some prayed aloud. But Cardinal Baresi slammed his palm on the bench. "Enough!" Silence fell again. The conclave must vote. Outside, the scene was unlike anything Rome had witnessed in generations. The square overflowed, not just with pilgrims, but with activists, monks, mothers, atheists, artists, candles in hand, signs in arms. Truth is not a sin. The Pope walks with the people. Don't silence the light. Helicopters circled overhead. News crews camped on rooftops. Police reinforced barricades. Inside the palace, Stefani stood at a window, watching it all unfold. She held the psalm book again, but couldn't read. Only wait. Only hope. The cardinals remained behind closed doors for hours. Tensions rose, tempers flared. Ancient grievances resurfaced. Some saw the Pope's words as prophecy. Others called them betrayal. But no one left the room. Then unexpectedly, door opened. A young priest stepped in and handed a sealed envelope to Cardinal Baresi. He read it silently, then paled. Robert looked up. "What is it?" he asked. Baresi turned to face the chamber. "An intervention." He held up the letter. A letter? From the former Pope. A collective breath caught in the room. He had retired, disappeared from public view. Some said he was in failing health. Others believed he'd taken a vow of silence. But now he had written. Barisi read aloud. To those who sit in judgment of the current Holy Father, I remind you that the seat of Peter is not inherited by tradition, but entrusted by providence. I, too, once held the ring, and I say this without hesitation. Truth spoken in love is never heresy. Courage and faith is never disobedience. The Church must not harden its heart when God speaks through blood and grace. If you seek to remove this pope, know that you are also removing your own claim to discernment. Benedictus Emeritus. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, cardinals began to rise. Not in protest, in reverence. Back in the palace courtyard, Robert stepped into the sun. The crowd outside erupted not with noise, but with song. 1,000 voices. One melody. He closed his eyes, breathed in the music, and finally felt free. News of the letter from the former pope spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines flashed across every major outlet. Emeritus Pope defends his successor. Historic moment of unity in the Vatican. The trial ends, but the journey continues. In Poland, cathedral bells rang in solidarity. In Argentina, priests held vigils. In Senegal, hundreds gathered outside churches, lighting candles in the shape of a cross. And in Rome, the chants never stopped. Grazie, Papa. Verita. Familia. Fede. He is one of us. Inside the apostolic palace, Robert removed the cassock and set it aside, folding it with care, not in resignation but in peace. When Stefani entered the room, her eyes were red, but her smile unwavering. You did it, she whispered. He looked at her, weary but alive. Number, we did it. She walked over, held his hand, and led him to the terrace. The city stretched before them, ancient and alive. They stood in silence. Then she said, Do you regret it? He didn't answer right away. Finally, if truth costs me everything, then it was never truly mine. She nodded slowly. Then maybe it was never about keeping it, but sharing it. He turned to her. You came here dying, and I was already dead inside. Somehow, we saved each other. She let the words sink in. Then, do you think they'll ever forget this? He looked out over the rooftops, over the bells and crosses and crowds. No, he said, and I pray they never do. That night, in his personal journal, the Pope wrote, Some battles must be fought not to win, but to prove the soul still breathes beneath the robes. And today, mine did. Tomorrow, I return to the pulpit, but tonight I rest as a brother. Let the church be built not on marble, but on mercy. Peace, it seemed, had settled over the Vatican, but peace is often the calm before the scream. It began with something small, a missing key. Father Luca, one of the Pope's most trusted aides, noticed it first. The small brass key that opened a restricted archive in the apostolic library gone. No sign of forced entry, no sign of disturbance. Just missing. He reported it to Vatican security. A day later, the cameras in that hallway stopped recording. The technicians blamed a power surge. But Robert felt something colder creeping in. He could sense itin, the way the guards looked over their shoulders, in the way the marble floor seemed to echo longer than before, in the silence after evening prayer, where once there had been calm, now there was something else. He called it the weight. One night, Stefani returned from a quiet dinner in Trastevere. The car had driven her back as usual, but as she passed through the eastern gate of the palace, she noticed something strange. A figure, moving through the shadows behind the inner courtyard. At first, she thought it was just a guard. But the way he moved purposeful, but without uniform made her stop. She turned to the Swiss guard at the entrance. Did someone just pass through here? The guard shook his head. Only you, Signorina. She turned back. The figure was gone. The next day, she entered the Pope's study. You're being watched, she said simply. Robert looked up from his writing. I always am, he replied with a faint smile. No, she said, her voice low. Not by the public, by someone here, inside. His smile faded. She walked to the desk, placed a thin envelope in front of him. "I found this taped beneath the cabinet in my guest room." He opened it. Inside was a single black and white photo. It showed the two of them, Robert and Stefani, walking together in the Vatican gardens. The angle was high, taken from a window, distant, but unmistakable. On the back, a single word had been written: inadmissible. That evening, Robert summoned Father Luca. "We need to know who has access to the Eastern Tower," he said. Luca hesitated. "That section has been off limits since the papal conclave. Only ceremonial access." Robert leaned in. "Then find out who's broken the ceremony." Meanwhile, Stefani visited the archive wing, trying to retrace her steps from earlier in the week. She wasn't a detective, but something about the silence in that corridor felt loaded. She ran her fingers along the ancient wooden shelving, stopped at one panel that didn't quite match the others, pressed it. A slight click. The panel shifted open. Insidian alcove. Not large, just enough for one small crate. Empty, except for a single item. A rosary. Not the Vatican kind. Handmade, crude, burned. And the crucifix was turned upside down. She brought it to Robert immediately. He stared at it for a long time. "This," he said, "is not just a threat." "What is it then?" she asked. He stood, walked to the window. "It's a sign that something buried long ago has started breathing again." That night, Robert requested the oldest Jesuit scholar in the Curia to join him, Father Emanuele. White-haired, nearly blind, but sharp as fire. When shown the rosary, the old priest turned pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Stefani explained. Emanuele looked at the Pope. "This is not new. This belongs to the Order of the Veil." Robert frowned. "That order was dissolved 3 centuries ago." Emanuele shook his head. "Not dissolved, hidden. They operated in shadows. Radical purists. Believed the papacy was corrupt from its inception. Their goal was simple: collapse the church, so that only the pure may rebuild it." "And now?" Robert asked. "They believe you are the final threat, because you've opened the doors to light." At midnight, the chapel bells rang out unexpectedly. An alarm. Robert rushed down the marble stairs with Stefani and 2 guards behind him. The side chapel, dedicated to St. Michael, had been broken into. On the altar, a single message carved into the marble with a knife. "The sanctuary is stained. Beneath it, the blood of a lamb. Still warm." Peace, it seemed, had settled over the Vatican. But peace is often the calm before the scream. It began with something small, a missing key. Father Luca, one of the Pope's most trusted aides, noticed it first. The small brass key that opened a restricted archive in the Apostolic Library gone. No sign of forced entry, no sign of disturbance. Just missing. He reported it to Vatican security. A day later, the cameras in that hallway stopped recording. The technicians blamed a power surge. But Robert felt something colder creeping in. He could sense the way the guards looked over their shoulders, and the way the marble floor seemed to echo longer than before. In the silence after evening prayer, where once there had been calm, now there was something else. He called it the weight. One night, Stefani returned from a quiet dinner in Trastevere. The car had driven her back as usual, but as she passed through the eastern gate of the palace, she noticed something strange. A figure, moving through the shadows behind the inner courtyard. At first, she thought it was just a guard. But the way he moved, purposeful, but without uniform, made her stop. She turned to the Swiss guard at the entrance. "Did someone just pass through here?" The guard shook his head. "Only you, Signorina." She turned back. The figure was gone. The next day, she entered the Pope's study. "You're being watched," she said simply. Robert looked up from his writing. "I always am," he replied with a faint smile. "No," she said, her voice low. "Not by the public. By someone here, inside." His smile faded. She walked to the desk, placed a thin envelope in front of him. "I found this taped beneath the cabinet in my guest room." He opened it. Inside was a single black and white photo. It showed the two of them, Robert and Stefani, walking together in the Vatican gardens. The angle was high, taken from a window, distant but unmistakable. On the back, a single word had been written: inadmissible. That evening, Robert summoned Father Luca. "We need to know who has access to the Eastern Tower," he said. Luca hesitated. "That section has been off-limits since the papal conclave. Only ceremonial access." Robert leaned in. "Then find out who's broken the ceremony." Meanwhile, Stefani visited the archive wing, trying to retrace her steps from earlier in the week. She wasn't a detective, but something about the silence in that corridor felt loaded. She ran her fingers along the ancient wooden shelving, stopped at one panel that didn't quite match the others, pressed it. A slight click. The panel shifted open. Insidian alcove. Not large, just enough for one small crate. Empty, except for a single item, a rosary. Not the Vatican kind. Handmade, crude, burned. And the crucifix was turned upside down. She brought it to Robert immediately. He stared at it for a long time. "This," he said, "is not just a threat." "What is it then?" she asked. He stood. Walked to the window. "It's a sign that something buried long ago has started breathing again." That night, Robert requested the oldest Jesuit scholar in the Curia to join him. Father Emanuele, white-haired, nearly blind, but sharp as fire. When shown the rosary, the old priest turned pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Stefani explained. Emanuele looked at the Pope. "This is not new. This belongs to the Order of the Veil." Robert frowned. "That order was dissolved 3 centuries ago." Emanuele shook his head. "Not dissolved, hidden. They operated in shadows. Radical purists believed the papacy was corrupt from its inception. Their goal was simple collapse the church so that only the pure may rebuild it." "And now?" Robert asked. "They believe you are the final threat because you've opened the doors to light." At midnight, the chapel bells rang out unexpectedly. An alarm. Robert rushed down the marble stairs with Stefani and 2 guards behind him. The side chapel, dedicated to St. Michael, had been broken into. On the altar, a single message carved into the marble with a knife. "The sanctuary is stained. Beneath it, the blood of a lamb, still warm." The following morning, a secret security review was launched. The Vatican's internal list of known infiltrators, dissidents, and former clergy was cross-referenced with recent access logs. One name surfaced: Brother Morris, a monk who had vanished from the Vatican registry 15 years earlier, believed dead, excommunicated, radicalized. His last known appearance? A failed attempt to sabotage a conclave vote in South America. He had been part of a forgotten sect, but no one knew his real face. Now, someone matching his profile had been seen within the Swiss Guard barracks. The security team, ordered not to alert the guards themselves, began silent inquiries. But Robert knew they were already too late. That evening, Stefani entered the papal quarters, her face pale. "I was followed," she said. He stood. "Where?" "In the basilica. I heard footsteps behind me, always just out of view. Then, a whisper. My name. But when I turned, no one was there." He moved to her, put a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't just fear," she whispered. "Something's coming." Robert nodded. "It's already here." Later that night, Robert and Father Emanuele pored over ancient sealed documents in the private library. Stefani sat silently nearby, still shaken. Suddenly, Emanuele pulled one parchment from the pile. His finger ran across the inked Latin. He read aloud, "Let the final veil fall when blood joins what doctrine divided. Then the false shepherd shall be struck, and the flame of reformation rekindled." They sat in stunned silence. "That prophecy," Stefani began. "It speaks of us," Robert finished, "of this very moment." Emanuele nodded. "The order believes your sister's arrival is the sign, the union of bloodlines across forbidden borders, and now they act." At dawn, an encrypted letter was delivered to the papal desk. There was no signature, no seal. Inside, a single Latin phrase: "Lux in tenebrae luce et tenebrae eam non comprehenderant." The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. and below it, handwritten. But the darkness learns. The Vatican had been silent for hours, but silence, as always, was the loudest sound. It began just before Vespers. The Pope had insisted on leading the service personally that evening, despite the warnings, despite the security concerns. "I will not let fear rewrite our rituals," he had said. And so, as the golden light of the setting sun pierced through the stained glass of St. Peter's Basilica, Robert stepped out in full vestments, his cassock white, his stole crimson. The choir began to sing. But halfway through the Kyrie, the lights flickered. A whisper rose among the faithful. Then a sound. Not loud, not shattering, just wrong. A door creaking where no door should be. Stefani sat in the second row, her eyes scanning the corners of the cathedral. She'd felt it since entering. A coldness beneath the marble, as if something had risen from the crypts, not in body, but in will. A movement caught her eye high above. In the organ loft, a silhouette, robed, watching. Father Luca approached the altar with the censer. As he swung it, the smoke curled unnaturally, thick, black, acrid. Robert stepped back. Something wasn't right. Then, without warning, the organ exploded into sound not music, but noise. A chord of chaos. Screams echoed, and from the shadows of the side chapels, 5 hooded figures emerged. Each one in dark robes, faces hidden, symbols painted on their hands. One word on their chests: purgare, to purify. Swiss guards drew weapons. But the figures did not attack with blades. They dropped to their knees and began chanting in Latin, Aramaic, something older. The words distorted the air. The glass shook. One of them screamed, "The false shepherd must bleed so the church may breathe." And in one swift motion, he drew a blade, charged the altar. Robert didn't move, but Stefani did. She leapt over the pew, pushed past 2 guards, and threw herself in front of her brother. The blade slashed her shoulder. Blood splattered the marble. Chaos erupted. Guards tackled the attacker. Another figure fled. The rest collapsed to the ground, chanting until unconscious. Robert cradled Stefani in his arms. Her eyes fluttered. She was pale but alive. He pressed a hand to her wound. "Stay with me," he whispered. Above them, the stained glass window of Christ shattered. A single shard landed at Robert's feet, pointing toward the altar, toward something hidden. Hours later, the basilica was sealed. Forensics teams and clergy debated jurisdiction. The Vatican's own intelligence service took the lead. Robert sat beside Stefani in the infirmary. "She saved me," he murmured to Father Emanuele. "No," the old priest said. "She saved us all." The next day, Robert returned to the scene. The basilica was empty, silent again, but the altar stone bore a faint glow. He knelt, touched the spot where Stefani's blood had spilled, and the marble shifted. A small section of the floor depressed, revealing a compartment. Inside, a scroll, sealed in wax with the same sigil worn by the attackers. Back in the library, the scroll was opened. It contained a prophecy centuries old, written in a forgotten dialect of Latin. Emanuele translated aloud, "And when the blood of the sibling flows upon the altar of men, the veil shall lift, the lies of the fathers shall be seen, and one shall rise to shepherd both shadow and light." They sat in stunned silence. Stefani, her arm bandaged, leaned forward. "They believe I'm part of it, that my existence fulfills this curse?" Robert nodded slowly. "Or this salvation." Emanuele closed the scroll. "This changes everything." Later that evening, Robert entered the Sistine Chapel alone. He stood beneath Michelangelo's Last Judgment, staring at the chasm between heaven and hell. He whispered, "Am I the shepherd they feared, or the fool they tried to stop?" He closed his eyes, then felt it. A presence. Not seen, not heard, but there, behind him. He turned and saw nothing, but the candle flames around the room trembled in unison. Weeks passed. Stefani healed both in body and spirit. Her shoulder bore a faint scar, but her voice was strong again, and her laughter returned to the halls that had grown too quiet. She chose to remain in the Vatican, not as a guest or patient, but as family. The decision surprised many, but Robert made it simple. Where love lives, family stays. The Order of the Veil, once a silent ghost, was officially declared extinct. The last of its members were identified, tried, and stripped of their influence. The darkness they carried was no match for the truth that had come to light. Brother Morris, the orchestrator of the attack, had nothing to say in his defense. When asked why they attacked the Pope, his only reply was, "Because he loved what should not be loved." The tribunal judged him guilty. The Church, however, chose mercy. He was sentenced to a life of silence in a remote monastic retreat watched, but allowed to reflect. His cell had no view, no mirror, no clock, only time and a crucifix. Inside the Vatican, change came quietly. The Pope initiated a series of reforms, small but meaningful. He restructured internal councils to include more diverse voices, began hosting open forums with laypeople, and emphasized transparency in the allocation of church resources. For the first time in centuries, an American pope was praised not for his doctrine, but for his humility. Pilgrims came by the thousands, not to see the man who had survived an attack, but the man who had embraced his own humanity. The Vatican gardens once again echoed with voices, prayers, and laughter. Stefani became something of a quiet legend. She never gave press conferences or interviews, but her presence in the Vatican became symbolic. She sang once more privately, in the chapel where she had nearly died. That performance, though never recorded, was remembered by every soul who heard it. A soft, haunting rendition of Ave Maria, sung not as a diva, but as a sister. One day, as spring began to bloom, Robert and Stefani walked the length of the garden path near the Apostolic Palace. The sun was gentle. The air smelled of lavender. "You know," she said, "I still don't understand how all of this happened." Robert smiled. "Neither do I, and maybe we never will. But it changed everything." He nodded. "It did. And maybe that's enough." They sat beneath a flowering magnolia tree. For a moment, they didn't speak. They just listened to birds, to bells in the distance, to the quiet heartbeat of a city that had seen everything. "I was angry for so long," Stefani whispered. "Angry at the church, at what it took from me, at the silence. But now, I'm just grateful." He looked at her. "Grateful for what?" "For being loved in the open," she said. "For being seen." He took her hand. "You were never invisible to me." She smiled. "But I was to the world." "Then let's keep changing the world," he replied. That Easter, the Vatican held the largest open-air mass in a generation. Robert stood before an ocean of faces, many of them tearful, holding signs that read, "Hope Lives and Faith Restored." But one banner, hanging from a balcony near the obelisk, caught his eye. It said simply, "Shepherd of Light, Brother of Mercy." He smiled, stepped to the microphone, and said the only words needed, "He is risen. So shall we all." Thunderous applause. But Robert's eyes turned toward one corner of the square, where a small group of children orphans from conflict zones had been seated. One of them, a little girl missing a leg, lifted a handmade drawing toward the Pope. It was him and Stefani, holding hands beneath a rainbow. In the weeks that followed, the Vatican received letters from every part of the world: atheists, believers, former Catholics, agnostics. They didn't write to debate doctrine. They wrote to say thank you. One girl from Tokyo wrote, "I don't believe in your God, but I believe in how you held your sister." A woman from Syria wrote, "For the first time in years, I prayed again. Not because you told me to, but because you reminded me why I used to." A prisoner in Brazil sent a charcoal sketch of Stefani's face with the words, "She bled but didn't break. She sang, and I listened." One night, months later, Robert stood again in the Sistine Chapel. It was late. The guards had been dismissed. The candles flickered. He knelt in silence beneath the Last Judgment. And for the first time since his ordination, he didn't pray for answers. He simply whispered, "Thank you." A warmth filled the room, not from the air, not from the candles, but from something older, something eternal. He rose, turned, and walked toward the doors. As he passed the altar, he saw a single white feather resting on the marble. He smiled. No message needed. The world didn't end. The church didn't fall. The prophecy, perhaps, was never about destruction, but about revelation. That love true, sacrificial, radiant, was the only truth worthy of any faith. And in the shadow of all that was nearly lost, the light remained.